Welcome to Created Healthy. I'm Dawn Combs. It's a common idea that God gave us everything we need in nature, but do we believe it enough to walk that out in truth? Often the very same people who say this go looking for answers on how to use food and medicine from man-made sources. Everything man creates comes with a user's manual. Why would God be any different? I challenge you to join me in seeking revelation about our body, mind, soul, and spirit health by digging into His written word and in practicing pure science in the visible world of His creation. Did you know that free time and rest as terms are actually two very different things? Free time is a commodity, and rest is actually an action. Rest is an intention to recharge and to regain your strength again, to renew, to refresh. It is an intention, and it is a work of healing the body that we give very little view towards in our current culture and society. Leisure time and free time, though, is either something that we aim at and we wear as a status symbol, which has been, the lawn was one of those big status symbols for a long time that showed everybody that you had so much free time that you could just manage a monoculture of green grass. And it stood for your wealth. And today, the lack of free time is now a status symbol because busyness makes you more important. Rest is not something that we commodify and use as some sort of way of being or an identity that makes us important in other people's eyes. Instead, rest is something that was actually ordained for our health, our mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health. And so today, I am looking at Leviticus 24 through 27, and I'm really thinking about this idea of the Sabbath. I had a long talk with my family this weekend about this, and I have read so much so far in doing this podcast about the Sabbath, and I have felt so convicted that I have looked at the Sabbath in a wrong way for a very long time. For me, growing up, the Sabbath was it was Sunday. It was the day you went to church, and it was the day that we made roasts. A lot of times it was something that went in and cooked a long time and was a special Sunday dinner. We saw family. It wasn't necessarily, I wasn't intentional growing up, and I think because I wasn't intentional in understanding what it was that I was doing, I lost it. Sundays today, in all honesty, I will have to admit that I have not kept the Sabbath. And the Sunday that my family has grown to do is often going to church in the morning and then working. It is a day that we are working to keep up with all of the things that need to be done, to keep our head above water, to try to survive. It's a day that usually we have my husband home because he's away working, and so it's a day that we feel like we have to take advantage of because we have full manpower available. Not an intentional day of rest. And I look at our health, I look at what is happening in my family, and I see stressed out children. I see myself stretched too thin. I see my husband stressed. And when we are stressed like that, we sin more. Just in thinking about my husband being angry or snapping at my children, and honey, I know you're listening, so I'm sorry to make this about you, but it's easier to snap like that when you don't prioritize rest, when you don't follow through with God's ordination that we take one day and we focus on rest. The Sabbath is a day of rest. It was originally given to us in the model of how God created the world in Genesis. And here in Leviticus, we are told about how to do the Sabbath for the land. So God's ordination for rest isn't just for human health, it's also for his earth. It is for his soil. It is for the places that he has set aside for us to get our food from. And we overwork that land and stress it out. And so he set up a Sabbath and for the land. So for 6 years instead of 6 days, 6 years you sow and you reap. And in the 7th year, it's a Sabbath for the land. And then he set up Jubilee, which was 7 times 7. So every 7 times 7 years, so the 50th year was a day of, or a year of rest for the land that had so much more going on. It was tied in with God's desire to not see us enslaved. Forgiveness of debts and slaves being set free, people who had to sell themselves into slavery because of financial difficulties. He was making Jubilee about not causing us the stress of enslaving our minds, our bodies, our souls to other entities than him. The freedom that we get in God is to be away from that, to not be impoverished in our cells, to not be impoverished in our souls and in our minds. And so the Sabbath is tied so sweetly here to this idea that rest is critical to the design. We have definitely attached a value system in our human culture to busyness, to I am so busy, I am so important, oh my gosh, people say all the time, I don't have time. No, you don't make time. And I hear all the time when I suggest that the very first thing that somebody needs to heal is to slow down and to rest. And often I hear, I don't have time, I can't possibly. And in thinking about this, I look at the structure of what God has here in Leviticus. And with this 7th year, you're looking at not sowing any crops for an entire year. So how are people eating? Because does that mean that God wants us to suffer while we're resting? Is it some honoring of him where we deny ourselves? And it isn't. What he has set up here is the same thing we saw with manna when the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness. Manna descended every day, and it was a shelf-stable product. It was not a shelf-stable product. It lasted for 24 hours. You gathered enough to eat that day, and it went bad. It disintegrated. It was no longer good to eat, and you had to gather it again the next day. But God had already set aside again in his creation and here in the Israelites' journey that the day of rest was critical, because on the 6th day, God rained enough manna for 2 days, and it was special. It was shelf stable. It was able to be retained and eaten slowly over the period of 2 days. And then it went bad, and we were back to collecting manna again. So there is a provision in what God was putting down for the Israelites. There was provision for, I'm going to make enough abundance on the day before you rest that you will truly sit down and rest and pause and focus on renewing your bodies, on healing. Rest is sleep. It is when we do all of a lot of our healing. One of the first things that we can do to heal the body is to sleep appropriately, because we are designed to reknit. Our systems are offline, and our body has the energy and the resources to focus towards healing. And so here we have this model of one whole day for ourselves every week to take time to focus on healing, to focus on resting and recharging and renewing. And further, God wants us to give that to our animals and our trees and our soil. And so here he has us sowing for 6 years. And in the sixth year, it would be under this covenant, it was abundant enough to last 3 years because it had to feed the people in the sixth year. It had to feed the people in the seventh year when there wasn't anything coming out of the crops of the field. And it also had to feed into the eighth year when people were planting again and starting to establish. And this gives me mind back towards the sourdough and the need to renew and refresh that stock and not using the same thing over and over again. There is something here in God's wisdom that he is trying to show us he didn't just say, hey, take a rest on the seventh day. It's really important. He modeled it. And then he used it as provision in the wilderness. And then he set it down as Levitical law. And then Jesus came and reinforced it again, even as he was paying for a new covenant. This is fundamental in our healing, in our ability to maintain wholeness. And again, it's not just our cells that need rest. It is our soil where our food comes from. It is our minds, our emotions, our soul. All of these things need a weekly complete focus on rest, focusing on that, focusing on our body's ability to do that in the original design, and having the intention. Rest is intention. It is the intent to start the new week ready to face the challenges because our body has had that room. And this is so convicting for me and so captivating. We don't give ourselves permission to rest in the Western, what would be called the wide road. Rest is not good. It's against what is prized in the culture. And that should be a real big sign for us that it is exactly what we should be doing. I pray that God is blessing you with rest, time to heal, time to renew and refresh. And I pray that he brings you back to study with me again on another day. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with a friend. And I'm always interested in hearing what God is laying on your heart. So drop me a rating or review, or join the conversation on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube at Dawn Combs Really.